statutes and what that means for us, ODFW, and us as Oregonians. That's going to take about 10 minutes or so. Then Michael's going to go into his part of the slideshow and talk quite a bit about the project proposal, talk about our department's net benefit analysis, the process we went through, what that means, and we're going to share with you our recommendation. Then we're going to, about 8:15 or so, going to open it up. That's ample time for folks, if you have comments, to write them down. We welcome folks to come up and do some testimony. Real clear, we're not going to be taking meeting minutes or real explicit notes. We want folks, if you have comments, to fill that form out and give them to us. But we will welcome time for folks to come up. We've got a lot of folks here. I'm guessing probably 100 folks, maybe more. We've got about 45 minutes to an hour, so we really want folks to stay on task, on focus. We really want the first part of our comment session to be specific to the department's fish passage process. We've gone through, if there are other issues that are outside the scope of this fish passage issue, then we'll have some time for some of that afterwards. But the focus of passage comment period is to hear input from the public on your concern, most important on any questions of my part. Any questions on the agenda? Great. Well, why don't we kill the lights and get right into it here. Okay, well, we're here to talk about the project proposal. The first few slides that I'm going to talk about are less on the project that we're going to learn all about tonight, but more on the ODFW fish passage rules and laws and process, to give you some context as to why we're here and what we're doing. So I want to emphasize again the process that we went through. Our rules that really guide the work we do for fish passage waivers are very clear, and they're in the rule package I referenced ago. And I know there's a lot of questions on property rights, on water rights, on dam safety, and a lot of other things. For department staff to come to a net benefit, our rules really, they require us to look solely at the biology, not the economic, not the property right issues, not the water right issues, but solely at the biology of the fish. And that's what we base our net benefit analysis on when we've done that. And as Mike summarized here, we basically, as a result of the proposed dam, we'll have lost access up to 1.75 miles of native migratory fish habitat. We recognize that, we verified that. And as a mitigation, the project owners, proposers have brought forward this mitigation, which opens up access to 2.06 miles. So there's, right over a quarter-mile benefit to be had by the project. Now we look beyond certainly this distance. We look at habitat quality, species composition, how will the mitigation site help those fish that would have been potentially blocked from passage at the proposal site. So it's not just simply a linear look for us. We look at habitat quality, habitat quantity, and it's from that we do our benefit analysis, and from that we make our determination. And our determination is, and we did present to our commission April 20th in Salem, was that the package makes sense. There's a benefit of a quarter mile, therefore we recommend that the commission approve the waiver package based on that information. So a little bit on process, a little bit more on process. Other things are rules required for all fish passage waiver exemptions. Certainly is the application, the waiver application, the department's net benefit analysis, the commission meeting. But in addition to that, we do have checks here for public. We have a fish passage task force committee that are appointed by our director. This project proposal went through that committee. They had a lot of comments. Their recommendation to the department was to recommend approving and moving the fish passage waiver forward in the process. Subsequent to that, we did a 3-week public from March 28, February 28, 2012 to March 21st, 2012. We received 2012, months ago. The commission decided to delay a decision pending more information and pending additional public outreach, which is the primary reason we're here, and to solicit your comments and concerns up to our commission. That's where we're at tonight, May 31. Our next step is to collate your comments and submit those to our commission for their consideration when they meet in August in Salem in 2012. I kind of went over this. The next steps for us are to listen tonight, record your comments. We will certainly provide clarity on questions specific to the fish passage waiver and the process we went through. I wish we could answer some of the questions like the property right issue. We'll give you fair time here in a minute, sir. But we have very little authority. So if we get that without authority, it really does you little justice whatsoever. To take these comments and to present these to our commission prior to their August 3rd meeting. I want to emphasize that these meetings are certainly public in nature. We welcome and encourage participation by the public. If you're interested, please mark your calendar. If you want a trip to Salem, I know it's a long trip, but that's the time when you can come and provide public or written testimony. You certainly don't have to be there present to provide comments. The comments, again, we'll take tonight will go to the commission for their consent on that date. What I did overlook, and I do apologize, were the ground rules for the meeting. And I do want to go over those real quick, and I appreciate everyone's patience. We're going to transition now into discussion and comment period. This pretty much wraps up our presentation to you. Let's just go through the ground rules, and you all have been very cordial thus far. Please wait and be recognized before speaking. If we can, please don't interrupt other speakers. These are all on your meeting agenda. Be respectful, courteous, focus on the issues and not the personalities. The scope of this meeting is limited to the ODFW fish passage waiver. If you have comments, concerns beyond that, we welcome those, we'll listen to those, we'll answer what we can. But it's really important to put those comments into the comment form so we can get those to our commission for their consideration. And again, we're not making decisions today. We're here to help provide you all a better understanding of the process we went through, to look into the project, why we made the decision we made, etc. So, everyone has some comments. If you have comments, please record those. Alan, you have?
Just a quick timeout. We just were notified there's a red Toyota pickup with its lights on in the parking lot. Thanks, sir.
So, with that, we welcome multiple comments, get forums, record them now. You can take those home and put some more thought into your comments or questions and get those to us. June 22nd is an important date. We'd like to comment in lieu or in preparation of the upcoming April or August 3rd commission meeting. The commission certainly welcomes public comment and testimony, like I said. You can provide written comments to that meeting as well. With that, it's 8:04 by my watch. We're pretty much right on track, if not a little bit ahead of schedule. Over Alan or Tim, do you guys have any thoughts, comments? How about we go ahead and open this up? If somebody has a question, now again, you're on audio, and we tested this before. You can hear folks in the back, so hopefully it'll capture.
Could you turn the lights on?
Put any comments on the form. And as I'm in the back, have her hand up first, so I'm going to recognize her. So if you would maybe stand up if you'd like. You had your hand up. And I really want to keep this to a minimum because we have an hour.
What I was curious about, first of all, I want to say that I live on Johnson Creek, so this issue is really an important thing.
Would you maybe provide your name?
Claudine Hunthausen.
Thank you.
I was interested in your analysis, and I was curious to know, is that something that's done over a from year to year? In other words, can you have, first of all, I should back up a little bit. I'm curious to know, because the material that you've shown is fairly new to me. If you were to rate both creeks in a 1 to 10, I would be curious to know if one was a 5 and one was a 7, or how they would compare. And then I would know, could that situation reverse itself in a year with different kinds of weather conditions and so on? Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. I think those are a couple of good questions. I think your second question maybe is the easier question. Certainly streams, rivers, and conditions for fish. Frankly, fish populations and fish themselves are very dynamic. They change seasonally, certainly annually, and sometimes more frequent. They have a cutting way to adapt very quickly to their changing environment. In case conditions certainly do change. They by all means do change. We're limited somewhat, the department is, with our net benefit analysis in that we are to take a look at the time of the trigger event, at the time the proposal comes to us, in this case the dam proposal. So we take that snapshot in time, and the conditions at that time are what we use to make that benefit determination. The mitigation package laid on top of the proposal to build the dam. So that process is a snapshot in time.
Okay. And just for, I mean, I won't hold you to it, but I'm curious to know how those two areas would compare to one another in some numerical
I'm going to take the
expression
easy
that I
approach. Michael is our local district fish biologist. Yeah, I'm going to. So Mike,
Is Blair 100% better than Johnson Creek, or only 25% better? Give us some kind of.
It's hard to put a numeric on it. I will tell you that as we went through this process, Greg and I, to do the net benefit analysis, started to find what the similarities between the two were in terms of course, they both have barriers to fish, and so part of the habitat is blocked, and Blair is mostly blocked now. There's just a very little part of it that has fish passage. There's some on Johnson Creek that's accessible to fish, but you get up not very high up in the system, and then you start to get to barriers. That when we look at the comparing the habitat between the two, there are sections of Johnson Creek that are very nice habitat, as I showed, particularly in the upper part of the basin with those spawning grounds that would be available for the larger fish like plover or steelhead. And the same in Blair. Blair has certainly that type of habitat, but they each also have some habitat that has been relatively highly impacted, particularly in the lower part of Johnson. Part of that is, again, what I said, the geology, but it's also has to do with land management activities and a lot of sediment getting into the creek in the lower part of Johnson. But you also have a section of Blair, which is, I believe it's no more than maybe a couple of tenths of a mile. It's really short. It's an agricultural piece. It's grazed, and so that section has been certainly impacted by land management activity. So, you know, it's difficult to do what you're saying, like give one a 5 and one a 7. You can actually parcel up those creeks and say, well, you know, Blair has some stream that's really a 10. It's really nice, and Johnson Creek has an upper part of the basin that's really nice. You know, it's a 10. But then Blair has some 2 and 3 that's not very good at, and Johnson has some 2 and 3. So they really did kind of compare fairly well, and then, you know, so saying that there's good habitat and bad habitat in each, then we really did kind of get back to looking at the mileage, and there was more mileage in the mitigation package that was being proposed as compared to what would be blocked by putting in.
So I'd like to move on, if we can. Please provide that comment to us, that's a good comment. Sir, I believe you were next.
I have a question probably for Mike. Stream flow between the two creeks, which has the greater stream flow, say at peak season?
That would be Blair Creek.
How much more can you give us an idea?
You know, I mean, we've got those tables of the flows, but I certainly have memorized those, but, you know, Blair Creek would have more of a peak flow than Johnson. And we've got the water resources tables of flow by month that would show that, but right offhand, off the top of my head.
Are the tables available?
Yes, they are. In fact, you can go onto the Oregon Water Resources website and request the information online for individual streams and see what data the Oregon Water Resources has. Again, the water rights and flow issues are not part of, currently part of the fish passage that we're looking at right now. So that's another process that Water Resources will be going through.
Thank you for the question. This guy next, we're going to go to the back. Thank you, sir.
I have a question about your process. In August, when the commission meets and if they approve this and grant the waiver, before they grant the waiver, do they require that the applicant have in hand agreements with the property owners that will allow this mitigation? If you give them a waiver and they go on the Lyles grant, they say, get out of here, get off my land, you're not putting a culvert in here, what happens then?
For this particular project, and that's a concern on this project and others we process, we want to make sure that the mitigation that the project will brought forward, that they have authority to implement or construct, in this case, replace those four culverts. For this particular project, we do have letters of agreement and support from the folks that own the property that those four culverts sit on.
The national ones.
I'm sorry?
The national ones.
That's correct. So that's an important point. At the end of the day, if they say, the project proponents, we're going to do X, Y, Z, and we come to find that they can't do X, Y, Z for whatever reason, then that basically nullifies our fish passage waiver agreement, and we go back and we can mandate past that location. I think we're going to certainly work with the landowner and try to cooperate and figure out why, what was the problem. But it would be incumbent on the owner, operator, to bring forward additional mitigation if one of those or multiple sites were unavailable. And then we would basically step back and start this process again. We would have to do a new benefits, go through the process. I think it's fair we would go back to our commission if appropriate.
And meanwhile, Mike lays in front of the D9 to make sure they stop. Okay.
You bet. Sir, and whoever's next, you're next. Sir. Yes, sir. You could maybe speak up, and if you don't mind mentioning your name, I apologize to the last folks that asked questions. But
my name is Keith Saylor. I just have a simple question, I think. So, Johnson Creek specifically, you've determined that the dam would be a negative impact? Is that correct? And then the question is, what is the negative that needs to be mitigated?
That's a good question. I wouldn't say we have come to the conclusion that there is a negative impact, and that's a broad question. I mean, define impact for me. I think you asked me to define negative for you. Our role here is to focus on the fish passage needs, commanded migratory fish as a result of the treatment, in this case, proposed dam, and to look at the effects on the fish passage from that point upstream, and define that, in this case, 1.77 miles is lost. And we would then,
What does that mean? What does that mean, 1.77 miles is lost?
that means with the construction of the dam, there would be a loss of accessible habitat to fish to the extent of 1.77 miles.
Okay, and so the mitigation, the net benefit analysis, you're saying basically, with the Blair Creek mitigation, that offsets over and above, I can't remember the terms you used earlier.
It's an appreciable net benefit
exactly.
And appreciable is defined as measurable, so
So it's not, so Johnson Creek, there's not a net benefit. But if you add in the Blair Creek mitigation, overlay that on top, then you can say, you're basically saying then, because of this mitigation, we have a net benefit. I'm trying to understand, make sure I understand.
I think if I understand your question correctly, that's correct. That's how we evaluate that. There's, 1.77 miles of habitat that will no longer be accessible to those species that we put on the slide.
So if we focused on some creek, and we were interested in habitat loss specifically on Johnson Creek, we could say, if you've determined that there's a net loss of habitat Johnson Creek because of the dam.
Michael, do you want to?
Yeah,
your thoughts here?
Yeah, if that, Greg, you've explained it to me, the rules being, if that dam that's being proposed were built with fish passage, what is accessible by putting fish ladder at that dam? That's what we compare to the mitigation that's being proposed.
That's correct.
Another way to look at it is, if the Johnson Creek Dam that's being proposed is built, what is no longer be accessible to those native migratory fish?
And it's important to note too, once we do issue waivers, once they're approved, then there is, if and when our commission approves this particular action, there is an agreement, it's a binding agreement that says, what owners are bound to legally to do, and that would be to fix those 4 sites on Blair Creek. Those waivers are basically good into perpetuity up until the time there is a new trigger event at the new dam. So those things I talked about earlier, major maintenance, new capacity, new construction, those are the things that would require us again at this site to come in and take a fresh look. Now that can be, many years from now, it's hard to judge. I don't know what the life of this new dam will be designed for, but these agreements are in perpetuity by me up until the time there's a new trigger event at that obstruction.
So just finally, just to say, you're not necessarily saying that, that this dam has a negative impact on John Creek.
I don't think we've said that. We've looked at it solely from a fish passage perspective. There is a loss of 1.77 miles of habitat as a result of treatment of the dam. And the mitigation strategy in Blair Creek would generate 2.06 miles of habitat that presently is not accessible, that would become accessible after the 4 culverts are replaced. That's a good question. I encourage you to please put that on paper. There was a question in the back. Yes, sir.
My name is Jim Camp. I live down in the Langlois area. I'm a cattle ranch. And anyway, I'm a member of the Curry Soil and Water Board. Anyway, ODFW is easy to work with. They're good people, but he may be able to get your permit, but I guarantee you, you'll be working with NIMS, the Corps of Engineers, and possibly U.S. Fish and Wildlife. They will run this project.
On
Is
that,
that not right?
I can't speak for those 2 federal agencies, no fisheries and U.S. Fish. But my experience tells me if there are
so many projects that
my experience tells me if there are listed fish, and there's actions like such that are proposed, and there's a federal nexus, federal lien on federal property, or a federal permit, which would, a Corps of Engineers permit, I assume would be a requirement. That would then,
without the Corps of Engineers authority.
I would assume that those agencies would be involved at some point along the
And
process.
they're tough, believe me. Something to think about, people.
Yes, sir. A question in the back, or in the side here?
Me?
I believe, yes, you.
Yeah, I'm Steve Gant. I'm a cranberry grower on Johnson Creek, and my family's lived there and used the Johnson Creek water for 74 years. And we're opposed to the project. Now, I got a couple comments, and I have a question. You know, my home's 30 feet above Johnson Creek and about half a mile approximately below below a 90-foot tall dam. And I fear for the safety of my family if the dam's breached, and I fear for everyone else down the street. Just the threat of the dam being there is going to have a major negative effect on our property values and our home values. And the people that are for the dam don't live on the Johnson Creek. They're off the side, well, away from it. Our insurance agent has notified me that if there is any damage to property or a home, that our homeowner's insurance will not cover, or our farm and ranch policy. And to have a dam surrounded by, cranberry bogs with the city involved for drinking water and for water use for the public, I think is a dangerous and bad idea. And there's going to be a major problem with erosion, silting, slides. Been there, seen it, done it, seen equipment down in there, stuck, just a huge mess. Especially when the vegetation and trees are removed. It's going to be a major thing. Where's all that going to go? Downstream. Two other water right holders trying to pump, and on and on. And I don't know if you're aware, the state must have setbacks. This was brought up from Water Resources a couple years ago. A lady from Salem, and they have a formula. Maybe not this year, maybe not 2 years from now. It could be 5 or 10 when you're retired and gone. They're going to they take a formula of the surface area by the depth, and that's how far they're going to have setbacks. It's really restrictive. Make that area up there probably almost impossible to grow cranberries. If not that, very, very difficult. And then losing property, trees, timber, pump houses, pipe, electrical. It just goes on and on, great. But anyway, my question to you is, Fish and Game for years has been telling us that there's fish in the stream, and they found them. We have the proof. There's no question if they're there or not. They require us to put fish screens in all our footvalves to protect the fish. And they felt it was so important that they applied for water rights for Johnson Creek to protect the fish. Now we're getting another story that there's no fish or what's, to worry about passage. So my question to you is, do you have a water right on Blair Creek?
Great questions, again.
Is it great? It's for your net benefit. If it's that important of a stream, that enhances that much, you should have a water right on Blair too. And Johnson.
Let me comment on your concerns. Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it. Please, those are comments I would appreciate you to submit. On the date and the other things you brought up, those are all valid questions. Kind of the canned response you'll hear from me today is that is beyond my authority as our Fish Passes program leader. Those types of issues would come forward through Oregon Water Resources Department. Dam safety, they regulate that. They regulate water authorization. So those issues would surface during those water right procedures or processes that the project proponents are going to have to go through. Oregon Fish and Wildlife has zero authority on those issues. And I have to limit my question to that.
I understand that, and I think it's just important things to consider, and that's why I brought them out.
On your second question about the benefit, maybe you could reframe that second question for your first question.
The water right thing on Blair, the net benefit about having a water right?
Yeah. It was brought to my attention today, actually driving up here via my smartphone, that we do now, the state of Oregon was issued a water right. I have not had time to look into that or process that. We did, I believe, pursue a water right in the 1990s, early 1990s.
In-stream water.
In-stream water. And that water right is, and maybe I should let you answer this, Michael, if you wanted to, just give some perspective on that, because I don't know all the details, but we do now have, as I understand, an in-stream water right effective